Hey, what's up, Liron here. One of the biggest mistakes I see in other people's paintings is the lack of contrast. But let me make something really clear. I'm not talking about contrast in values, but rather contrast in saturation, among other things. So in this video, we're going to do this exercise of painting from gray to saturated and from saturated to gray, and I'm going to tell you about the super duper high importance of doing this correctly for making better paintings. Okay, so with that, let's take it to the table and we'll get started. So as I mentioned, the exercise is actually fairly simple. What we do is decide either to start with gray or a very saturated color, and we slowly tone it back to the other side of the scale. My entire goal with this exercise is to train you to work within those muted sides of the colors you're using, because so many people are so used to using only the highest, purest, most highly saturated versions of the colors they purchase, when in fact there is an entire beautiful scale of grays and saturated versions of these colors that are just stunningly beautiful and are important for getting the message of your painting right. Very often in my paintings you'll find a contrast, which I use interchangeably as difference, okay, with the word difference, in saturation, the levels of saturation. What this does is, first off, it gives you something interesting to look at. When everything is highly saturated, the work tends to look a little more amateurish, and I'm sure many of you have seen and produced these kinds of paintings. I know I have. Super blue pure sky and a very green unified grass and then some red for flowers, and it's all screaming at you. Now, it can be done this way, it can be used this way, but I do find that very often this is done out of lack of experience rather than deliberately and in a way that will end up being beautiful. So what I want to do here is for you to do this exercise and train yourself in working within those different ranges you're not used to. And this can be used as an excellent tool for controlling and directing the viewer's attention, for letting the people who look at the painting know what the story is. Again, in most of my paintings, you'll find this variety and contrast in saturation. You'll see me painting a lot of cars, maybe a very busy junction, and then you'll see me working on the things that I want to be the focal point, being more punchy, more saturated, more colorful. And the background's a little more muted. It's a little more in the distance. And there is a lot of beauty in that. Now, look at what we've got so far. Right now I'm working with French ultramarine. This is M gram. Next I'm going to do yellow ochre, also M gram. And finally I'm going to do Pyrrole Scarlet by Daniel Smith. Look at what I'm doing right now. Look at this French ultramarine. It's super bright. It's just the purest form of French ultramarine. If you use this all across your painting, everywhere, just as much as you want, it can look good, but very often you run the risk of making it rather cheap or cheapening it. Why not preserve that beautiful ultra-saturated blue for a very specific instance where you want to direct the viewer's attention? You see what I'm talking about? And I hope that makes sense. In many of my paintings, you'll see this. And I do want to elaborate just a tiny bit on the concept of contrast, okay? The way I see contrast is it's not necessarily in values, because this is what we usually use this word for. Light value right next to a dark value creates a contrast. Strong contrast means the light is lighter and the dark is darker, meaning the gap between them is larger. What I'm talking about here is contrast as the concept of difference. We have a contrast in levels of saturation. We can have contrast in values. We can have contrast in temperatures of colors. We can have contrast even in shapes and sizes. So you can have one shape that's huge in size and monumental, and then a lot of small shapes next to it. The small shapes help convey that the large shape is in fact large, and vice versa. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And here we're looking at a very narrow type of contrast that is in the saturation. Okay, so now what you see me do is working on that yellow ochre. This is, by the way, a simple challenge, but not necessarily an easy one. It really can be challenging to slowly and gradually push the
saturation levels to be a little lower and a little lower and a little lower. What's beautiful about yellow ochre, which is again what I'm using right now by M. Graham, is that it's already muted to begin with. It's not the brightest, most shouting yellow to begin with. And so you get a very good benefit of using it right out of the tube. It's not going to make your paintings as screaming and as weird as some other paints will. So you can in fact use very muted blues, muted reds, in the yellow ochre straight out of the tube. And you'll get a beautiful result that still has that beautiful air of balance. Now, I want to direct your attention to something interesting. Look at the right side, rightmost side of the top scale and the leftmost side. You get the most saturated blue and the most saturated yellow. These two together are very strong again, and it has this amateurish feeling. Imagine them alone. Okay, it has this. It just feels like a children's painting. Now, I want to make it very clear. I'm not judging. If that's the type of art you want to make, go for it. Me personally, I find that there is a little more subtleness in those muted colors. Okay, well, again, you're free to paint however you want. Okay, next up is Pyrrole Scarlet, which is what I'm using right now by Daniel Smith. Hyper bright, strong red. I wanted to choose this one on purpose because in its most saturated form, it's really screaming. And again, look at the strongest side of each scale. Together, I don't know how good they look, but if you look at the muted areas in the center, can you already imagine how much depth and beauty you can create with them? Just look at all these, the three central ones in every row. Right now we have only one in the red row, and now I'm adding the line, and now I'm adding the third one, the second one for the red. Look at these. There's so much subtlety and cleverness in utilizing these, and you really, I think, want to use them. You want to bring this contrast into your paintings. Let me tell you why. Even if you love painting bright and that's the thing you want to do, I highly recommend you try something different so that you know why you're doing what you are doing. Maybe you'll find out, wow, my thesis was right, and I do enjoy the highly saturated paintings a lot more, so I want to stick to them. Maybe you'll say, wow, I actually like this kind of a weird trick that Liron taught me. Maybe I want to stick to it and do more of these, more muted, subtle paintings. Maybe I do want that. Okay, so with time, you'll slowly get to realize what works for you, but I want you to do things out of being deliberate, out of choosing to do them rather than doing just the one thing you know. Okay, so now let me give you a real up-close look at what we've done here. I'm very happy with this exercise. I hope you'll enjoy this one, and I hope it will really enhance your paintings.
Now, if you really look at all of the highly saturated colors, just imagine cramming all of those together into one painting. It can work, but it is a bit risky, and you do need to work those contrast muscles in other fields, okay? And this is really important. I talked about it, I believe, in a podcast episode, and a lot of people could relate to this. And it's just one of those things that will make your art automatically so much better. So in any case, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. If you want to learn how to paint like me, be sure to check out the link to my frustration-free watercolor course down in the description box below. I really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I will see you again in the next vid real soon.